Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for We'll Always Have Paris, which is episode 23 of season 1 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Next Generation one episode at a time. In this video I cover the first season episode We'll Always Have Paris. So We'll Always Have Paris is the episode in which the Enterprise starts to experiencing weird time anomalies. They go to the source where they find Picard's old lover who he abandoned without saying goodbye back when he was much younger, who is now married to a brilliant scientist named Mannheim. Mannheim has been studying the time and whatever, and created a big time anomaly that is wreaking havoc, and he's gone insane from this experiment himself, but through a few moments of clarity is helping Picard and crew solve his issue, and they eventually do seal the issue. Meanwhile, Picard is dealing with seeing the woman he abandoned once more, but they make peace with each other and part on good terms as she returns to her husband, who will go continue his work. So, I remember this is an episode that when I was watching it, when I first started getting into Star Trek when I was a teenager, that I really did not like. Now, growing older, I learned to appreciate the sort of nuance of this episode and the romance aspect and the character aspect, which when I was younger I found very boring. But there's also the time aspect, and it's funny, like throughout the years when I've seen clips of this, because I think when I first saw this episode, I didn't even remember the time stuff. I was too just overwhelmed with the Picard hooking up with the old flame that I was like, this is boring as fuck. And I always dismissed this episode as really boring. And then later, because I'd gone many years without seeing this episode, and then I would see clips of the timey thingy where you had Picard, Riker, and Data outside the turbolift, and they go in the turbolift and the door opens and there's a different version of them from 3 seconds earlier, and they're talking to each other. Or the scene where there's Data's on the planet trying to seal the rift, and there's 3 different Datas, and they're all which one's the real me? Oh, it's me. And I was like, wow, this looks cool. This looks like because I love the really time bendy, time twisty, stuff like Timescape, Cause and Effect, or any time travel stuff where they play with time. And I would see clips of this, and I totally forgot about it from when I saw it. I was like, what the hell episode is this from? This looks like from the first season. When did they do this? And then I look it up. I was like, oh yeah, We'll Always Have Paris. Now that episode sucks. But then I would actually think maybe I didn't give that episode a shot when I was too younger. Maybe I was just letting the romance story interfere. Maybe it was actually a really cool, very interesting sci-fi concept. But, within the past couple of years, when I went back and revisited this episode, I found that no, it's actually not that interesting. It's not that good of a sci-fi concept. And here is, even though it is cool, those certain scenes where, the crew is talking to themselves from 3 seconds earlier or whatever, and there's 3 different Datas being, oh, which is the real me? That's aesthetically cool. But when I analyzed this episode for my season reviews, I sort of came to the determination that this is just a basic weird anomaly B plot, and the fact that it involves time travel is actually incidental. That it could be about anything. Now, this is something Trek would get very guilty of, Next Gen in particular, in seasons 4 and 5, particularly 5. And they would do it a couple times in 6 and 7 as well. And then Voyager would do it all the fucking time, where there would be a character story and there would be a B plot that was some weird anomaly thingy majogger just to create tension. So, people would get bored, like the 12-year-old me would get bored and their eyes would gloss over the character things, so they need to have some flashy sci-fi BS in order to keep them interesting. And usually these, B plots with the sci-fi BS are very, very throwaway. It's always involves some weird anomaly, and they have to use some technobabble bullshit in order to resolve it. I'm sure I'll get to a lot of these episodes later when I get to season 5, in particular of TNG, and when I get to Voyager. Oh God, they just love doing this. And these plots are throwaway and usually not very interesting. I'm trying to think of, there was a lot of different examples, like a nebula that made the Enterprise sort of phase and people would like get stuck in walls, or one where there was like an eddy or whatever that was like flying around and they could destroy them, or I don't know, and the one where the replicators stopped working and everything. I don't know. There's always these weird anomaly BS just to create tension, but it's really just a throwaway plot. And that's essentially what this episode is. That is definitely the conclusion I come to when analyzing it. Although it looks cool, like having like the different timey-wimey thing with different versions of Data Record and Picard talking to themselves. It's not cool in the sense, and it's not like an interesting concept the way like Timescape, for example, is an interesting concept. Like what they did with Timescape, one of my favorite TNG episodes, was actually a fascinating use of like a sci-fi concept, whereas this is more like another throwaway B plot in order to create some tension in the episode, and it's really. It really because it doesn't even have to deal with time travel. It could deal with anything. They could make up some other BS. It just incidentally happens to deal with time travel. As I said, it's very incidental, because the main point of it is to create a problem for Picard to solve, and he needs the help of his ex-girlfriend's new husband, and he has to deal with her being on the ship and the emotional turmoil that would cause him. But they resolve it pretty easily, and it doesn't, other than having a couple little cool, look, they're messing with time. It's just there to be there. And I remember watching this episode when I was first watching Discovery, and there was a season 2 episode of Discovery where they also dealt with some like time travel shenanigans, and I remember thinking like Discovery, the episode actually was much better than this one because it was relevant to the plot. It wasn't just a throwaway anomaly BS bullshit that's forgettable that could be anything. It specifically dealt with the storyline with Control, and it specifically dealt with the storyline and added layers to the storyline, where this is just some BS to keep the tension high. And it doesn't even have to be time travel. As I said, it could literally be anything. So ultimately, yeah, I mean, it looks cool. I will give it props for that. I'll give it points for that. But other than that, so maybe it's more interesting than some of the anomaly BS that they do in season 5 or in Voyager. But still, it's just there for the sake of being there. It doesn't actually tell an interesting story. It's resolved very easily. It's not obviously just not the point of the episode. The point of the episode is this old flame of Picard. So let's get into this. And as I said, like, I've learned to appreciate this as I grew older, and got more into sort of character stories and the romance thing. And it is interesting that because Picard, I think when I first saw this episode, I was very confused on what was going on because I don't think they explained it very well. In fact, even watching this again, I feel like they should have had a scene where Picard and Troy spoke privately and Picard explained exactly what was going on. Now, maybe some people like it better that they sort of slowly over time revealed what the deal is, because I think it was played kind of somewhat nicely, because when Picard first hears the name Mannheim, he reacts because he's like, he knows that's who his ex-lover is married and knows that she's there. And Troy can sense that. You can see Troy following Picard after he tries to dismiss and act like he's fine. She's like, I could definitely sense, like, you were very disturbed or very unnerved when you heard this name. Do you want to talk about it? I said, no, I don't want to talk about Council. I'm fine, blah, blah, leave me alone. Which, it is within Picard's season 1 character, but I would like to think that later seasons he sort of grew beyond being this. He's always been a guarded and very private person, but I still feel like it would have benefited the episode had he eventually given in and actually talked to Troy and explained, well, this, I actually knew this person and we were going to spend our lives together, but I couldn't, I was going to leave her to go to Starfleet, and wasn't even brave enough to show up, and I just left her at the cafe waiting and just disappeared. I think that would be cool. Now, some people may disagree with me. Some people might have liked the way they revealed it with going on the holodeck, and Picard wanted to relive the moment, and so he asked for that holodeck to do that exact day. And at the exact restaurant, but it's just, I don't know. Did the holodeck know what had happened with Picard? Just so because they just so happened to program another character who was going through the exact same thing that the woman Picard left behind was going through, where the guy never showed up. And then Picard was sort of, asking her about it, and eventually is like, oh, enough of this nonsense, and just left the holodeck. He didn't end the program. I was thinking about that. I was like, is he just leaving that programming running so someone else can just come in and be like, hey, what's French things going on? Remember to turn off your shit, Picard. Don't leave the freaking program running. Anyway. But I don't know. Like, some people might have preferred that because it was more subtle and maybe said more emotional. But I actually would have preferred a more direct, because I think it would have been a really powerful scene to have Picard actually open up to Troy and actually reveal some of his emotions. Where I think going in the holodeck and just seeing some holodeck character who's saying this, and as I said when I first saw this was 11-12, I didn't really get it. I didn't understand what they were getting at. But yeah, I mean, they could have done him talking to Troy and also going into holodeck. You can't, you could have done both. But yeah, I don't know. I personally feel like it should have been more clear. But then when she did come aboard, he was, obviously being a bit weird. Like, he showed up in sickbay and was like, hi. He was like that exact. Was obviously a bit awkward, and she was like, oh my god, it's Jean-Luc. A bit surprised. Maybe she kept up with him through the years and was aware of what he looked like, but I get the impression, I don't know if they said specifically how old they were when this happened, but I get the impression they were like in their early 20s or something. And I don't know if you've seen someone that many years later, and I'm sure Picard, Jean-Luc looks so incredibly different when he was like 1920, that I don't know, I found it a bit hard that she recognized him instantly. But maybe she had been, because apparently he had been keeping up with her and knew that she was married to Mannheim, so maybe she had been keeping up with his career and saw like images of him and so knew what he looked like now. But anyway, I do like the interactions between them, and how at first, they're all just business and they're talking about Mannheim. And I do like the scene where she came in, they were in Dr. Crusher's office, and she, kissed him on the cheek and left, and he was like, he told Crusher, it's like, she's an old friend of mine, and the Crusher's like, yes, I can see that. I'm just more worried about the man who's out there dying right now, if you care to talk about that. But then, I don't know. So later we got the scene with Troy and Crusher, and it always felt out of place to me. And maybe that's because I saw later seasons when they dropped the whole Crusher and Picard thing. And I talked about this earlier in season 1, that they didn't really go anywhere with this or far enough. Like, they hinted at it a little bit in episodes like Naked Now and The Big Goodbye. But here there was like, Crusher was going to Troy's like, how am I going to compete with a ghost from his past? Who says you're competing with anything? Like, you're never like actually willing to be in a relationship with him, and that never comes up. You just flirt occasionally. So I don't know, and especially in context, it feels really out of place. And I think if this was written by someone who wanted them to go into this Picard Crusher romance more, which obviously did not happen until like season 7 or like after the show ended, where they hinted that they got together and had a son, whatever, in between like year. But anyway, so yeah, I don't know, I didn't like it. I thought it was out of place. But the stuff with when God, I can't even remember her name, but when she approached Picard in private, and it was like, look, we gotta talk about the elephant in the room, we gotta discuss this. And he's like, she was just like, why'd you leave me there? And he's like, I was afraid. He's like, oh, no, I didn't want this. I didn't want the truth. I wanted a lie. And it's like, oh, you want me to lie to you? Okay. Oh, I thought I got the days mixed up. I thought it was Tuesday when it was actually Wednesday. And then she was like, oh, you couldn't find a cab. It's like, yeah. And they kept doing shit like that. I like that scene. I thought that was a really good scene. And it sort of and it was a nice interaction between the two characters. It showed how, with time passing, that she no longer sort of resented him for it. But then she, did want the truth, and he was like, well, the truth, I was afraid. I was afraid that, I can't remember exactly what he said, but afraid he couldn't live up to her, afraid that he couldn't, stand to see her be let down. But then she said, I think you were afraid that I would make you ordinary. And he was like, God damn it, you're so wonderful. Like, me exactly. And it's sort of, he said this in kind of a self-deprecating way as well. So this was like the strongest character moment for this episode, I think. This, I think, really revealed a lot about Picard. And I think this was a really powerful moment. But that's pretty much all we got. I mean, we got the scene where, I keep wanting to call him Oppenheimer because I saw that movie recently, but Mannheim, he thought he might die, and he said, Picard, can you take care of her? And he's like, oh, of course. Like, come on. You're not going to take care of her. And why would a husband who's dying say to this dude who once had an affair with his wife, like, decades before we met, be like, if I die, you gotta hit that. He didn't say it like that. It's more like, you're gonna take care of it. No, I don't buy that. That's bullshit. But anyway, he'd be like, get the fuck away from my wife, you fucking you're that would be more of his attitude. But I suppose this is Roddenberry's 24th century future, and human beings are supposed to be beyond jealousy and all that, whatever bullshit Roddenberry would say. But anyway, I still didn't buy that scene. But nothing came of it because, of course, Data saved the day. And it was cool. I did like how Picard asked Data to go by himself. And actually, his logic was really sound. Was that if you had other members of the away team that could get confused or disorientated by the time effect, and Data was really looking at a very logical, he's an android, very objective, logical standpoint, whereas other, feeling people, human beings or other aliens could let their sort of emotions or concept mix them up. And I think that was sound logic, and I do think that's what would have happened if like Riker or Worf were down there. They would have been like fucking, would have made things worse. And it was easy because Data was looking at a very factual way and being like, hey, when there was 3 different Datas, like he was like, which one's in the actual timeline? If it was like a human, they might be like, no, I don't think it's you, I think it's me, and they might argue about it. Where Data is like very factual, wants to get the point, and has no ego to get in the way, so he'd be just saying, oh, it's me. It's like, okay, cool, you go. So yeah, and I do like when Picard first told Data that he had to go by himself. Data's like, oh, I get it, I'm an android, I'm dispensable. And Picard's like, no, indispensable is more like it. Because, and I do like that Data didn't really take offense, but sort of understood that maybe, and this is before he sort of formed the bond with Picard, so while humans might see androids as a lesser and a bit more expendable, but I like how Picard's like, no, you're fucking awesome. You are the last thing from expendable, but it makes sense for all these other reasons that you go by yourself. And that was cool. I like that. I think that was one of the good character builder moments for Data when he did realize what Picard actually did think of him. And of course, this would feed into the second season with episodes like Measure of a Man. So that was cool. But again, the whole just solving this issue did happen quite easily, and the whole anomaly was kind of just there to be there. But then everything resolved. Mannheim was back to his self, and he could go back, and his wife could go back to him, and they could go, live together. And I do like the concept of Troy escorting her to the holodeck where Picard had recreated the program. And apparently she's never heard of a holodeck before and has no idea what it is. You think something like this. I guess I do get the impression that this was a very, very new invention at the start of TNG. Let alone the fact they had hologram things like this in Discovery in the animated series, but let's not get into that. But yeah, they do give the impression it's this very new thing, but still, like, she doesn't even seem to understand anything about it. She would have at least heard of what a holodeck is. She was like, I don't know how you did this, but this is really awesome. I was like, but anyway, I really like that scene as well. I did think that was a really powerful scene that he got to sort of, and I like how she appreciated that he got to sort of say goodbye the right way. So create that same cafe that he was supposed to say goodbye to her, and where he actually did get to say goodbye. But it was all too short. Like, she just went in, like, didn't even have a drink, stayed there for like 30 seconds and then left. And she's like, so much for my dramatic exit, because she couldn't figure out how to get out the holodeck. But of course, when she said exit, the arch appeared, and Picard's like, which again, like, I think they should have actually said, actually sat there and had a meal and reminisced for a bit instead of just talking for 30 seconds and leaving. I guess that's my main nitpick about that. And maybe that would have been more of a proper way to say goodbye. Now, granted that they are saying goodbye, that they're not, they both know that, she's involved with another man, so they're not going to have an affair or anything like that. But it would, and I'm not talking about any hanky-panky going on, but I'm just saying, like, if they had a longer conversation, sort of reminisce, whatever, and talk about their lives and what they've been up to this whole time, the kind of people they've become, and then say goodbye, I think that would have been better. And to be clear, I wouldn't expect any of this to be on the screen. I would assume that they would show them starting to talk, and they would cut the scene, and then they could do another scene, and then would come back and show them leaving, and to imply that they'd been there for some time. That's all I want. And I think that would have worked better, rather than just talking for 30 seconds and she walking out the door immediately. But it was still a nice scene, and I still appreciated that they got to recreate the moment, and he got to go back and correct a mistake from earlier in his life. I think part of the reason why I never really found this episode that memorable or it never stuck out to me is because it doesn't really seem to fit. Like, because it's never referenced again. And it doesn't really seem to fit in the history of what we know of Jean-Luc Picard. Like, it doesn't contradict anything. Don't get me wrong. But not just this specific event, but nothing sort of surrounding it or any sort of character, aspects of Picard that relate to this were ever explored again. So it feels very irrelevant to the rest of the show. But I guess that's next gen for you. It's episodic nature, although, as I will argue forward, next gen wasn't always episodic. But that's the topic for another time. In this case, it was very episodic. So that's pretty much all I got to say about this episode. So let me thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It helps me to continue with this channel, and I am just very thankful. So we have Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Miguelcio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Britton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal Howes. Thank you all so very much for your support. So we have a singular Patreon comment on this episode from Greg Marley, who says, "The romance stuff has always made this episode drag for me, but the sciencey main story is actually pretty good. I really like the turbolift scene where Picard, Riker, and Data interact with their alternate selves from a different point on the time continuum. It's so funny early in the episode when Deanna takes Picard aside on the bridge to butt in and tell him she senses that he's repressing his feelings and presumes to tell him in a fairly condescending way that he needs to spend some time alone confronting his issues before the ship gets where it's going. Picard is like, yeah, I'll tell you when I need your help. They were clearly figuring out Deanna's role and purpose all through the first season, were pretty blunt in reminding the audience about her special abilities. The obviousness is reminiscent of the original series and other older sci-fi, and surely results from the original series people who were shaping so much of the show in that earlier period. Note also the very TOSE lighthearted humor ending, complete with smiles and whimsical musical strings. Deanna also butts in later in sickbay when she drags it out of Beverly that she's anxious about because she can't compete with guest star Michelle Phillips for Picard's attention. We forget how they originally wrote these two with clear and ongoing romantic tension when Crusher returns in season 3, and from then on, all that was pretty much forgotten or shown as something buried and basically theoretical. Well, far be it from me, I don't want to be too sort of argumentative to those who support me on Patreon, but I don't see it that way. I actually I take Deanna Troy's side in this case. I think she's it is her job, and she can sense that Picard's extremely uneasy and it will affect his performance. I think she has every business. In fact, I would say Picard's in the wrong here because he should have actually talked to her rather than just dismissing her and saying, you can talk to me in this turbolift. And I think she was doing her job. That's just me. That's just my opinion. Also, the show, I think this is a case where the writers actually wrote Troy correctly, because usually they actually took her empathic abilities into account, because usually they forget about it, and they act like they don't exist when it's inconvenient for them. But here, when Picard heard that voice he would obviously be anxious because he realizes that, and nervous, and have a spike of emotion after hearing the name because he knows that woman he abandoned is there, and so it would make perfect sense that Troy would sense that. So I personally like that, but that is just me. Let's see, but yeah, but the Deanna Crusher thing, I do agree that didn't work, and it was about the abandoned romance. It just, even within the context of season one, since they couldn't stay consistent with that. For example, Arsenal of Freedom, where it was originally supposed to be intended to be a romance thing between Crusher and Picard, but ended up not being. They couldn't even stay consistent with it within season one, so yeah, it doesn't work really anyway. Anyway, my rating for will always have Paris out of 10. Now, this is a tough one because this is when I wish I did 0.5s, but I don't do 0.5s. Cop out for me. It's not in my rules. So, because I wanted to give this a 6.5 because I can't decide between a 6 and a 7. I think I will give it a 6. Yeah. God, I can't decide. I don't know. Part of me wants to give it a 7, but the other part thinks it's just not good enough for a 7. Because the sci-fi plot, cool looking as it is, it's just a throwaway. It could be anything. And the character story, while it does work in some places, it really doesn't work in other places. And I think there's some things that... Okay, so I'm more solid on this. I'll give it a 6. I'll stand by my 6. Because, yeah, this is kind of a forgettable episode, to be honest, to be fair, and as I mentioned before. So, yeah, so I don't think it's quite deserving of a 7, even though some character parts, some scenes like the one with Picard and what's her I can't remember her name, but when they were like reminiscing, it was like, oh, I should tell you a lie, whatever. Like, that was good, and when they actually got to say goodbye properly, was good, although not as good as it could have been. And some of the sci-fi things were cool looking, so that's worth something. But yeah, ultimately, it is kind of a forgettable episode. So yes, I will give it a 6, but I do think it holds up better than a lot of these earlier season 1 episodes. I'll say that for sure. So that is it for my review of Will Always Have Paris. So let me check out what's coming up on my channel soon. So Wednesday, we'll do my season review for Ahsoka season 1, and then Thursday we'll review the latest episode of Lower Decks, and then Saturday we'll be doing a revisited for the first time in like forever with my revisited for Conspiracy. That is over on Patreon for my Patreon supporters. Yes, we'll finally be doing a revisit for the episode Conspiracy. And then on Monday, we'll be doing my top 25 best episodes of Better Call Saul. Really looking for that one. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that and all the other Star Trek and other reviews I'll be doing here. So thanks a lot for watching.